Hey, welcome to this episode of The Complete Advisor. So glad you could join us. We have a very special show with a very special guest. But before we get there, I do want to remind you, of course, please feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below. And I tell you what, I see those comments. I personally respond, so I would love to know what you have to say. If you get out on Apple or some of the other services, give us a rating. We would appreciate that too. So today, here's what we're going to talk about. In our industry, there are advisors that charge fees and there are advisors that wish they charged fees. And it's very rare that you get the opportunity to talk to somebody who's charging fees, but then also when they're charging that fee, they're sticking to it. They're not waiving the fee later on. And so that's what we're going to talk about is an advisor who made that decision years ago to go from not charging a fee to charging a fee, but then also actually charging a fee. And so we're joined today by Frank Oliver. Frank, good to have you here, sir.
Thank you, Dennis.
All right, so let's just dive right into it, and then I'm going to tell folks a little bit more about you here in just a second. But so you at one point made the decision, you made the decision to charge a fee. What was your practice like prior to charging a fee?
I think our practice didn't offer, as far as the optics and the perception to the public and the client or the prospective client, I don't think the value was as significant as it is now that we charge a fee. I think pretty much everything we were doing in the past was somewhat similar, but there's just a couple little tweaks and a couple little fine tunings that you can always do. It's the 80-20 rule or the 20-80 rule. You change 20%, and that's what makes that the 80% difference. And I think charging the fee did that for us. So as far as our daily operations and holding the workshops and all of that, very similar to what we're doing today. But I think, honestly, charging the fee forces us to do a better job as well.
So you would say before, you just kind of a standard practice. What made you finally decide to start charging a fee?
Yeah, I think everybody goes through this where you build the plan for the client. At least we build a plan for every single client that comes in. So I think maybe that differentiates us from some. But we would build a plan, and then we would actually print the plan out, and we put it in a nice spiral bound, folder, send it off with them. And I think it gets frustrating sometimes when you go through all that work and you print everything out. And then they take it home and read it or not read it. And then they say, well, I want to think about it. Thank you. Or they'll take it to their CPA or their other advisor or talk to cousin Eddie about it. And it just, it became, I think it's frustrating for all advisors in the industry when you build a plan like that and put that much time into it and hand it out to them and you don't get anything out of it. So we would, I attend a lot of high level conferences and seminars like Ed Slott, Master Lead Advisor. And you go to these breakout sessions with some of the nation's most renowned advisors. And I heard this over and over again. If you're not charging a fee, you're doing it wrong. But I think my practice, I'm not sure that I thought it was at a point where I was offering enough value to the prospect that I could charge a fee. But I was wrong. I was wrong.
So was there a moment that maybe a moment like the straw that finally broke Frank's back, if you will, of like finally you're just like, doggone it, I've been thinking about it. Maybe did a prospect walk? Did you just decide after another meeting like, doggone it, they're right? Or
yeah, I think there's always something that breaks, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Maybe it was just one more meeting with one of these conferences where I heard another advisor or coach talk about charging a fee, how you need to do that. Maybe just a conversation at lunch with a bunch of advisors and they're charging fees. And then I honestly think, probably that combined with maybe some prospects coming in that we put our heart and soul into these plans, and then they walked away after doing all that work. And, it happens sometimes. It's our industry. And you didn't receive any compensation for that, and you felt slightly used, which is definitely not a good feeling. So I think a combination of those events, changed my mind and changed my practice for the better.
So how long do you think it's been since you started charging a fee?
I bet we've been charging a fee for 5 or 6 years now.
5 or 6 years. Well, let me ask you this. Yeah. So this is I have this theory, and tell me I could be all wet on this, but when I look at your practice, which you have an awesome practice, but you have a couple of your bona fides here. You have the Ed Slott Master Elite program. You have been doing Ed Slott that program for a while, so your tax game is like solidly on point.
Totally.
You've got you actually have with your practice, you have a trademark process, which I think is so cool that it's trademarked to boot.
Yeah.
Did that coincide with about the time you started charging a fee, like getting those designations, putting that process out there, so then you felt like you had the chops to say, hey, this is my fee, or did that all kind of work at the same time?
Yeah, well, I've been with that slot for 10 years. So I've been with that slot about twice as long as I've been charging a fee. But I think it was the time process that I built the taxes, income, money, and estate planning. And when we presented that to the client, and then we used Creative One's retirement analyzer software, and we branded that time. And so I think when we built that process, built the time process, integrated that into workshops and our books, and I wrote the book on time, I think all of that together instilled in me that I brought significant value to the prospect, and that there is enough value to charge a fee.
Nice.
So I think all of that coming together, I'm not going to say the timing was perfect because we made that time work for us. No pun intended on the time.
Do I owe you $1 for that? Each time I say time, I owe you $1.
Say it again.
The time. There's another $1.
Yeah,
I'll mark him down here on my sheet. So let's go back. Let's go back if you can. I'm going to ask you to go back pre-COVID memory here. Do you remember the time? No, there's another $1 right there. Do you remember maybe the first day that or the first time that you actually told a client, this is my fee? The first time you presented it. Do you remember that at all? Do you remember what were you thinking?
Yeah, I was scared to death. But honestly, it was probably the biggest leap and one of the biggest steps I've ever taken, because in your mind, I think a lot of advisors go through this, that if you charge a fee, we charge $500. If you're going to charge a fee, that the prospects, they're just not going to cough up that kind of money. They're not sure they want to do business with you yet. They're not sure what kind of plan you're going to build for them. So I was scared, but I knew that I needed to take that step. But yeah, I was very fearful of the first client that I charged a fee, just to see what their reaction was and to see if they're going to walk. And honestly, it was probably the most miraculous thing, is the very first client or prospect that I did charge a fee. It was the easiest move I've ever made in my life. They had no problems at all paying for advice. And I think that was definitely a game changer as far as my mindset, how I run my practice, the value that we bring to the client. And again, it kind of holds us accountable as well to make sure that we do a good job. So it's a really good fit.
Now, there's a two-parter to that, actually, when I think about it, because I know some other advisors that if you do, I charge a fee, but if you do business with me, I'll waive that fee. But you don't waive that fee. Tell me about that decision.
Yeah, we do not waive the fee. We actually don't have any prospects or clients even ask us if we're going to refund the fee if they do business with us. But I think in their mind that if we do a good enough job and that we build such a nice plan for them and create a lot of different scenarios as far as tax planning and income planning and social security planning, that they don't expect the fee to come back. And I think that, we tee it up in such a manner that we're putting a lot of work into this, so we do deserve to get compensated for our time. And I think they understand that. We don't have a problem with that at all.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about your procedures now then. So tell us a little bit about that. So I can say my wife Paul and I come in, we meet with you, it's time for us to pay the fee. You're going to hand over a plan to us, and then we're deciding. But what are the mechanics of do I hand you a credit card? How does that part work?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. We don't, so I'll back up there a little bit. We don't actually hand a plan to you. So we're a little bit different in that regard, as well as we do not do any printed plans anymore. So, but we will build a plan, just, it's all digital. It's up on our smart board in the conference room. So they'll come into the office, and our first meeting really is, the majority of that meeting is going over our processes, what we're going to do for them, the value we're going to add, how much money we're going to try to attempt to save them on taxes. And we go through step by step of how we're going to build a plan for them. And the interesting part, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but before I finish my meeting, the clients are asking me, or the prospects are asking me, okay, how much is this going to cost me? And they're not talking about, how much for managing their assets or any of that. They want to know how much it costs for a plan. I've never had anybody ask that until probably the last 2 or 3 years, when we really just held ourselves much more accountable for doing such a good job for the client. And I think that becomes evident in our first meeting, where we're going through the planning process. We're explaining time, taxes, income, money, and estate. We're explaining the retirement planning software. And it's I have to tell you, it's that easy. And I don't know if it's just because we've stepped up our game that much, because we knew that if we're going to charge $500, we have to get $500 worth of value,
Yeah.
But before I end my first meeting, they're asking me, how much is this going to cost me? And we tell them, we're very transparent about it. And we got the legal Creative One Wealth documents, and we run up front to Tyler, and they give Tyler a credit card number, sign the documents, and we promise them a certain date that my plan will be done, and that legally holds me accountable for making sure that I get my deliverables due to them by a certain date. They pay, and then we go to work for them.
I like it. So what about, let me ask you another question then. Do you track this, but what do you think that's done to your closing ratio?
Oh, it's significantly increased my closing ratio. I think once a client pays for the $500, one, they believe that there's $500 worth of value there. So if they've already sold themselves, or you sold them that what you're doing for them is creating $500 worth of value, the odds of them backing out of that are much less likely. Our closing, we've always had a decent closing ratio, but it's significantly increased. And I can't tell you to what percentage, but we probably close 80 or 90% of the people that come in the office. But again, if they're willing to pay for that plan, they view you as a very credible advisor from the very first step. So you're just creating a much stickier prospect. And there's, you got that monetary, exchange there. And once somebody, forks over $500, the odds of them backing out is much less likely, because they have some vested interests. They trust you enough to give you the $500. They're probably going to trust you enough to follow through the plan.
So there's the impact with the clients, but the impact on the practice from maybe for lack of a better word, swagger or self-esteem or belief in what you're delivering, that has to have elevated that game too.
Yeah, I think it has, definitely. I think that, there's a lot of folks in the industry that maybe start off in one capacity of our world. Maybe it's selling annuities or selling life insurance, and then they get into AUM, or, maybe they're just starting off with a smaller practice, and they're working as hard as they can to get that practice built up. And I think, there's very few people that start off in our industry with that level of confidence, because it's a really difficult industry to start in. But I think when you do get to the point that you just start charging a fee for these clients, and they're willing to pay that, it does make you feel, I guess, to use your words, like a much more credible or confident advisor, when people are willing to give you money for your services versus, in the past, and I still see it all the time, we're going to do this complimentary plan for you. Everything's complimentary. There's no charge for the first meeting. It's 100% complimentary. And they even say it at their workshops, we'll build a complimentary plan for you. And I just think that really diminishes the credibility of the advisor when they do that. And again, I was in that same boat. I was a complimentary plan guy for 10 years, maybe 15 years, so I've done thousands of complimentary plans. So.
Awesome. Well, let me ask one last question for you. What advice, if you're going to go back, you've got the time machine, you're going back, you're talking to a young, salty Frank Oliver, what advice are you giving him as it relates to this?
Well, before I say that, you said time again, so you owe me another $1. So, my advice would be to use some planning software and build a plan and build a process for these prospects that you are offering a valuable service that you can legitimately charge a fee for. You're not just going to run off a Social Security timings, 3-pager and expect to do that. You're going to have to put some work into it. But I think it also made me a better advisor, because I'm not going to say my work ethic, but just the attention to detail that we put into these plans now, and the amount of work and explaining and the depth of our presentation has stepped up its game. Because if they're giving you the $500, you better give them $500 worth of value. So any advice to anybody out there is just build a process and don't be scared to charge a fee. It makes you a better advisor, and the client respects your time more, and they respect the work that you're putting into their plan, and it adds a lot of value for them. They're not just out there kicking tires and shopping advisors. They want to do business with you after that. So.
Nice. That's a perfect spot to wrap. Frank, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dennis.
For everybody else out there, don't forget like, subscribe, and you can watch us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. If you want to listen, you can do those. You can do iHeartRadio, Pandora, the whole kit and caboodle. We're out there. But we'd love it if you'd subscribe, like, put some comments out there. I'll respond to them. I'd love to know what you have to say. Frank, thanks again, and we'll call it a day.
This podcast is for financial professional use only and not for use with the general public. The information provided is the exclusive property of Creative One and is protected by copyright and other intellectual property laws of the United States. This material has been prepared for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended to provide, and should not be relied upon for, accounting, legal, tax or investment advice. Creative One is not responsible for the results of programs discussed on this podcast or any liability stemming from the use of it. Although we may promote or recommend the services offered by this company, agents are ultimately responsible for the use of any materials or services and agree to comply with the compliance requirements of their broker-dealer and registered investment advisor, if applicable, and the insurance carriers they represent. Copyright 2022, Creative One Marketing Corporation.